The Last High King. The Legend of Brian Boru. The 23rd of April, 1014. Good Friday. Dawn breaks over Clontarf. The tent flaps in the wind. Inside, a man in his 70s kneels in prayer, his weathered hands clasped together. Outside, the sounds of battle rage, screams, metal on metal, the thunder of thousands colliding on blood-soaked ground. Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, refuses to fight on this holy day. He prays for his men, for his sons, for Ireland. The canvas rips open behind him. What happens next will echo through 1,000 years of history. What happens next will transform a warrior king into legend. But to understand this moment, this death, this victory, this catastrophe, we must go back. Back to a time when Ireland was not a nation, but a battlefield. Back to when Vikings ruled the coasts, and Irish kings fought Irish kings. Back to a boy who watched his world burn. This is the story of how one man tried to unite an island, and how that dream died with him in a tent on the day he finally won. Long before Ireland was a nation, it was a patchwork of warring kingdoms. Picture it. The year 940. No central authority, no unified rule. Just dozens of petty kings and chieftains, each claiming their slice of green earth, each willing to kill for it. The provinces fought each other. Clans within provinces fought each other. Brothers fought brothers. And then there were the Vikings. They had arrived in 838, building fortified settlements, long forts, at key points along Ireland's rivers and coasts. Limerick, Waterford, Wexford, and most importantly, Dublin. By the 10th century, Viking Dublin had developed into the Kingdom of Dublin, a thriving town, controlling extensive territories in the Irish Sea. These weren't just raiders anymore. Many Vikings were assimilated into Gaelic society and became the Norse Gaels. They married Irish women. They traded with Irish merchants. They converted to Christianity. But they also represented power military might that Irish kings would hire, bribe, or battle against depending on the day. Into this chaos, in the province of Munster, a child was born who would change everything. Around 941, in Killaloe, County Clare, Brian Mac Sen-Eitig entered the world. He was the youngest of 12 sons, born to Sen-Eitig Mac Lorcain, king of the Dalgash tribe. Not a major power, not a dynasty anyone feared. Just a regional clan straddling the River Shannon, trying to survive in a world that devoured the weak. The Dalgash were warriors by necessity. Brian's father and older brothers conducted river-borne raids, sailing down the Shannon to strike at enemies and rivals. Young Brian would have learned warfare from childhood, how to read currents, how to move men, how to strike fast and vanish. But childhood ended violently. When Brian was just 11, the Ohunacht, the traditional power in Munster, allied with the Danes to crush the Dalgash. Brian's father and mother were killed. The center of his world collapsed. His older brother, Magawin, survived and became king of their diminished clan. For years, they fought. Not just against the Norse of Limerick, but against Irish rivals who saw the Dalgash as upstarts, pretenders to power they had never rightfully held. Then in 964, something unprecedented happened. Magawin captured Cashel, the ancient seat of Munster's kings, and declared himself king of Munster. The younger brother watched and learned. Brian was no longer just a warrior. He was becoming a strategist, a leader, a man who could see the larger game. 3 years later, in 967, Magawin defeated the Viking king Ivar at the Battle of Sulcoit. Together, the brothers drove the Norse out of their stronghold in Limerick. For the first time in generations, an Irish king had beaten the Vikings decisively. Victory felt close. And then came betrayal. In 976, Magawin was captured by Donovan Mac Cahal and murdered by Molloy Mac Brain, an Ohunacht rival who claimed the kingship of Munster for himself. Brian's world shattered again, but this time, he didn't break. He hardened. Brian became king of the Dalgash and immediately sought revenge. He moved with brutal efficiency. First, he attacked the weakened Vikings in Limerick, killing Ivar's successor. Then he turned his fury on the Irish, who had betrayed his brother. In 978, At the Battle of Lecta, Brian defeated and killed Malloy. The Ohunacht power structure crumbled. After centuries of dominating Munster, they were broken. The kingship of Munster passed to the Dalgash. Brian became king. He was 37 years old, and he was just beginning. What made Brian different wasn't just his skill in battle. Though he was formidable, it was his vision. After defeating his enemies, he didn't continue the cycle of revenge. He sought reconciliation. He gave his daughters in marriage to Cain, the son of the man he had killed. He allowed the Norse to remain in Limerick as subjects rather than enemies. He understood something other Irish kings didn't. Unity required more than conquest. It required integration, alliance, strategy. He looked at fractured Ireland and imagined something no one had achieved in living memory. One island, one king. Under Brian's rule, Munster became more militarily and politically aggressive than it had been before. He didn't wait for threats. He created them. He campaigned into Leinster. He pushed into Connacht. Every victory brought new territories under his control, new kings forced to acknowledge his authority. But there was an obstacle. Maelshach Luh, Macdon Ull, king of Tara, whose power base lay in the Midlands of Ireland, represented the traditional order. From the 7th century onward, the kingship of Tara had been held by members of the Uí Néill dynasty, who controlled the northern half of Ireland and claimed the title of High King as their birthright. Brian was an outsider, a southerner, a member of a clan that, 2 generations earlier, had been irrelevant. In 997, Brian and Maelshach Luh agreed to divide Ireland into 2 spheres of influence, the northern and southern halves. It was a compromise, a truce, and it lasted exactly as long as Brian needed to build his strength. By 1002, through a combination of strategic marriages, persistent negotiations, and demonstrated military prowess, Brian replaced Maelshach Luh as High King of Ireland. He was declared Emperor of the Irish in the historic Book of Armagh during his own lifetime. For the first time in Irish history, a king outside the Uí Néill dynasty held the high kingship. By 1006, Brian was more successful than any Irish king before him, and may be considered the first genuine king of Ireland. But triumph brought new problems. The price of power. Brian's control was always uncertain, and secured only through frequent massive displays of military might that intimidated opponents and averted potential rebellions. He was a king who ruled by the sword, by alliance, by fear, by respect, but never by universal love. Every year, he marched his armies across Ireland to remind regional kings why they had submitted. He collected tributes. He married his children to rivals. He rebuilt monasteries, destroyed by Viking raids, positioning himself as protector of the church. By 1011, he had succeeded in uniting all the provinces of Ireland under his rule, though several regional rulers submitted with great reluctance. It was the zenith of his power. Ireland, for one brief moment, was unified, but the cracks were showing. Brian had divorced his second wife, Gormflaith, a 3 times married Hiberno-Norse queen. It was a political disaster. Gormflaith was no ordinary woman. She was connected to Viking Dublin, to Leinster royalty, to networks of power across the Irish Sea, and she was furious. She began engineering opposition to the High King. Around 1012, relations between Brian and Leinster became so strained that revolt broke out. Her son, Sigtryg Silkbeard, king of Dublin, allied with his uncle Maelmorda MacMurch, king of Leinster. They had been defeated before at the Battle of Glenmama in 999, but this time they would not fight alone. Sigtryg went overseas in search of Viking support. He enlisted Sigurd Hlodverson, the Earl of Orkney, and Brodir, a warrior from the Isle of Man. He promised both men the kingship of Ireland if they defeated Brian. The trap was set, the gathering storm. In early 1014, Viking fleets from Orkney and Man sailed into Dublin during Holy Week. Brian mustered his forces. The army of Munster was joined by Maelshach Null, the former High King, now Brian's ally, and 2 Connacht kings. They marched on Dublin. But then came a devastating blow. Due to some disagreement, Malshak Ella and the men of Meath withdrew from Brian's army. The High King was suddenly outnumbered. His most powerful ally had abandoned him. His son Merca would lead the actual fighting. And Brian, now about 73 years old, knew he could not fight himself. Some reports say he refused to fight because he was devout and would not spill blood on Good Friday. The armies met at Clontarf, just north of Dublin, on the 23rd of April 1014. Good Friday, the bloodiest day. The Battle of Clontarf was something Brian had generally avoided during his career, a large pitched battle. Most martial engagements in Ireland were ambushes, cattle raids, or small encounters. This was different. This was total war. The battle lasted from sunrise to sunset. Estimates of casualties range from 7,000 to 10,000, making it one of the bloodiest battles in Irish history. At the front of Brian's forces were the Dalgash, led by Brian's son, Murcha, Murcha's 15-year-old son, Torloch, and Brian's brother. They fought like men possessed. The front line of the Dublin Leinster forces were the foreign Vikings, led by Brodier, Sigurd, and a man called Plate. All day they clashed. Shields splintered. Swords broke. Men drowned in the tide that turned against the retreating Vikings, trapping them between Irish blades and the cold sea. Brian's 15-year-old grandson Torloch drowned in a weir, dragging 3 Vikings with him to their watery graves. Brian's son Murcha, the heir, the commander, the future of the dynasty, fell in the fighting. The Vikings lost key leaders, including Sigurd of Orkney. By sunset, it was clear. Brian's forces had won. The Dublin-Leinster alliance was shattered. The Vikings were fleeing. But victory had come at an unimaginable cost. Brian was in his tent, praying. The sounds of battle had shifted. The clash of weapons grew distant. The screams changed tone from rage to terror as the enemy broke and ran. It is said that a traitor in the Irish camp, possibly Tiga O'Calla, king of Uimain, had pointed out Brian's position to Brodier at some point during the battle. Brodier was fleeing. His brother Ospac had betrayed him, joined Brian's side. The battle was lost, but Brodier was a warrior of the old religion he had tried by sorcery to predict the outcome, auguring that if the battle were on Good Friday, King Brian would fall but win the battle. Now, cutting through the chaos, he found the High King's tent. The accounts differ on exactly what happened next. One Irish account says Brodier overcame Brian's guard, only to be killed by the High King, who then killed himself. Niall's saga records that Brother killed Brian and cried out, "Now let man tell man that Brother felled Brian." Another version says both men struck simultaneously Brian's sword, hacking through the Viking's leg, while Brodier's axe cleaved the king's head. What is certain? Brian's followers, Wulf and Kurth, returned to find both men dying. According to the saga, Wulf the Quarrelsome cut open Brodier's belly and led him round and round the trunk of a tree, and so wound all his entrails out of him. Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, was dead on the day of his greatest victory, in a tent, while praying on Good Friday. The irony was absolute. Brian's body was brought to Swords, north of Dublin. There it was met by the Corb of Patrick, the traditional head of the church in Ireland, who brought the body to Armagh, where it was interred after 12 days of mourning. Along with Brian were the body of Murcha and the heads of Cunning, Brian's nephew, and Mathla, king of the Dacia. The victory at Clontarf broke the coalition. The battle ended in a rout of the Viking and Leinster forces. While Norse settlers remained in Ireland and integrated into local society, their political power was effectively broken. But Brian's dream of a unified Ireland died with him. Malshach Lamach Don Ul was restored as High King of Ireland, and remained secure in his position until his death in 1022. Though the annals imply that life was not much changed after the death of Brian Boru, it created a succession crisis, as Brian's son and heir Murcha had died as well. Brian had 2 remaining sons who could challenge for the kingship, Dun Acha and Tadse. Within weeks, the Dalgash were battling their old masters in Munster. Dun Acha eventually ordered his brother Tad's killing in 1023. The cycle of violence resumed. After the battle, things more or less went back to the way they were before Brian. The King of Leinster won back his old title. Sigtryg remained as ruler of Dublin. The Ohanacht won back their Munster kingdom, and the Dalgash went back to their old territory. Ireland fractured again. But something strange happened in the centuries that followed. During the later Middle Ages, Brian's victory at Clontarf continued to be celebrated in Irish bardic poetry, particularly because the island was troubled by another set of foreigners, the English. Some expressed hope that another king like Brian might rise up to crush the foreign oppressors. The term often used for the English was Gael, foreigners, the same as that used for the Vikings. The Battle of Clontarf was reimagined. Popular perception sees the battle as the great victory where the Christian king of Ireland, Brian Boru, defeated the pagan Vikings and drove them out of Ireland. This is myth. Modern historians see it as an Irish civil war in which Brian's Munster and its allies defeated Leinster and Dublin, with Vikings fighting on both sides. But myths are more powerful than facts. Clontarf was mythologized within decades, gradually becoming viewed simplistically and inaccurately as an encounter between Christian Irish and pagan foreigners. This titanic framing of the battle helped create the popular and scholarly view of Brian as Ireland's greatest king. His harp became a symbol of the Irish nation to this day. The man became legend. The brutal, ambitious warrior king who united Ireland through force and fear was transformed into a national hero, a symbol of resistance, of what Ireland could be if only it could unite. The 23rd of April, 1014. Good Friday. Dawn breaks over Clontarf. Inside a tent, an old man kneels in prayer. He has lived 73 years. He has seen his parents killed by Vikings. He has avenged his brother. He has conquered Munster. He has defeated the traditional power structure of Ireland. He has claimed the high kingship. He has, for one brief shining moment, united an island that had never been united before. Outside, his sons and grandsons are dying to preserve what he built. He knows, perhaps, that this is the end, not just of the battle, not just of his reign, but of the dream itself. Despite his military victories and political savvy, Brian's death at Clontarf marked the end of a rare period of centralized Irish rule. The tent flap rips open. A Viking warrior steps through. This is how empires end. Not with grand speeches or final battles, but in a moment, sudden, violent, almost accidental. The most powerful king Ireland had ever known, killed by a fleeing soldier in a canvas tent. But here's what Brian couldn't have known, kneeling there in his final prayer. His death would matter more than his life. For 1,000 years, Irish people would remember his name, would tell stories of the Battle of Clontarf, would imagine him as the last great high king, the man who almost saved Ireland from itself. He is remembered not just as a warrior king, but as a symbol of Irish sovereignty and resistance. Not because he succeeded, but because he tried. The Viking's axe falls. The High King dies. The legend begins. Brian Boru remains one of the most iconic figures in Irish history. His legacy lives on in the O'Brien dynasty he founded, in the harp that became Ireland's symbol, and in the memory of a man who dared to imagine an Ireland that could be whole.